It is good. It is good.
Welcome to the Office Hour. My name is Fred Zerm, and I represent the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. Thank you. We are a volunteer organization whose mission is to promote writing and writers on the institution grounds and beyond by both supporting and supplementing the official activities of the institution's Writers Center. We sponsor several events every week. On Sundays at 5 o'clock in the Prose Room on the second floor of this building, writers and listeners 18 years old and above are invited to participate in an open mic session. On Fridays at 1:15 in the Garden Room on the first floor of this building, we offer an informal critique session. Writers are invited to bring in 10 copies of one page of their prose or poetry for feedback, guided by a published writer. This week, that'll be John Brantingham, who also teaches officially with the institution, so we're privileged to have him. And today, on Tuesdays, we have the Authors Hour, where two Chautauqua writers will present their work. At halftime, I'll tell you about some of our special events after our first author. Books will be for sale after the readings, and we also should have time for a short Q&A. Tim Love earned a BS in Business Administration with a minor in Fine Art from Miami University and a master's in Communication from the University of Illinois, where he was named Most Outstanding Graduate. After that, he launched a 42-year career in the advertising industry. His exceptional brand building credentials came via some of the world's largest and most successful brands, such as Procter & Gamble, Nissan and Infinity Motors, PepsiCo, Gillette, Mars, and Johnson & Johnson. He has lived in Tokyo, Brussels, Singapore, and New York, and has obtained first-hand experience with consumers in over 120 countries. After retiring in 2013 as CEO of the Asia Pacific, India, Middle East, and African regions for the Omnicom Group, he has taught and lectured at Oxford Said School of Business, the U.S. Communications College, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, UCLA, University of Illinois, and the Savannah College of Arts and Design, among other institutions. Tim has also been a TEDx speaker, and in 2016, his book, The Book That Gets Better with Age, won 6 literary awards in the category of health and aging. His latest book, Discovering Truth, How to Navigate Between Fact and Fiction in an Overwhelming Social Media World, was based on his 5-year podcast and has won several awards and other forms of recognition. Outside of writing, Tim has also been involved in the advertising industry's efforts to remove hate speech and illegal drug content from the internet. Tim Love.
Coming out on this rainy day, and I've always been pretty lucky. There's actually a chapter in my book about luck, and I think being here on the 150th anniversary of Chautauqua is a pretty amazing thing, and to be able to talk to you today about truth, that seems highly appropriate. As Fred said, I spent 42 years in the advertising business. A lot of people think that there's a lack of truth in advertising, but I can tell you when you work with clients like Procter & Gamble and Johnson & Johnson and Nissan, and you work across cultures around the world, you really have to tell the truth. The truth is the most important thing about advertising, because if you're not telling the truth or the consumer doesn't appreciate what you said about your product or your company, they'll punish you by not buying you anymore, or they'll tell other people about their unhappy experience. And now that we're connected in this internet world that we live in, that punishment can be pretty quick and pretty powerful. So truth is actually a very important thing, and something that I've studied during my career, and in terms of the art and science of persuasion. So when I retired, I was asked to give a talk at a very conservative Catholic university, and they were going to be launching a marketing and communications curriculum. And they asked me to do the inaugural lecture for that program, and I thought that it would be a good idea to have a forte in their marketing department for truth. And about a week before I gave the talk, I went online and checked their curriculum, and it said their curriculum was designed to help students' discovery of truth. So that was another lucky example. And I'm going to read some summaries, but ever since I started working on this book, it's gotten more relevant every day. And more things that more people have reached out to me to ask me about information they've received. And I don't profess to be an arbiter of truth, but I do profess to follow what Mahatma Gandhi said about truth. He said that the seeker of truth should be humbler than the dust. The world crushes the dust under its feet. For the seeker of truth should so humble himself that even the dust would crush him. Then and only then will he find the truth. The book comes in two parts. I took after I gave the talk, I sent it to the former CEO of Procter & Gamble and Walt Disney Company, who shared writings over the years. And he sent it to somebody, and the guy was a podcast creator. And so the next thing I knew, I was doing a podcast. And then he liked what we did, the introductory podcast, which is the one I would recommend you listen to if you were going to listen to one. He asked me to do one a month for the 15 months between that point in time and the 2020 election, because truth was such a pervasive topic. So I must admit that one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this in the first place at the university was when I retired and came back to the United States, I was very concerned about all this talk about fake news. And I was particularly concerned when I heard comments like the journalists are enemies of the people. I felt that that was very dangerous from a historical standpoint. And I wanted to look into it myself and understand what was going on. I have come to the conclusion, a lot of people say, well, what is truth? And I tell people that truth isn't a fact or what somebody tells you. It's a decision we make. A decision made in the face of massive amounts of information, conflicting ideas, in the face of our own confirmation biases that we've learned from, and those confirmation biases aren't bad. They're things you learn and you've kept hold of to make sure you don't get hurt in this world. And also in the face of what other people's opinions are. So if you think of truth as a decision, as I did this morning walking up over here, I noticed that I must have passed at least 3 different religions headquarters. And I assume there must be how many, Fred? More than 20?
Right.
So there's at least 20 people that made decisions that might be different than decisions that we make. Truth is a decision we make. And we shouldn't be afraid to revisit those decisions. That's called rethinking. And rethinking is another word for learning. What happens as we get older is we become more locked in on our confirmation biases. And we seek information that corroborates those decisions as opposed to seeking information to learn. Another thing that we're not aware of that I talk about in my book is the shift that we've all had from our palette of communication, which was mostly verbal, face-to-face, to now probably more than half texting and typing. And when we text and type our decisions, they become locked and concrete. And that's why people said write your objective on your resume, or why companies have marketing strategies. You write them down, they're more likely to happen. So we're not aware that we've been making decisions, writing and texting, particularly during COVID, which has enabled us to become more polarized. And I think everybody understands what I mean by more polarized. Probably the most polarized example of America is our Congress right now. So I want to move in now to a piece that I'll introduce here, and it's a summary of where I am on some things and the focus I'd like you to think about. America's internet crisis. Kids are dying while advertisers are buying. The recent House Judiciary report puts profits ahead of safety. I believe it's time for America to put safety ahead of profits and classify online content that carries advertising and collects consumer data as advertising-funded speech. A Kids Online Safety and Privacy Act, called COSPA, is coming up for a vote in the House of Representatives in September. It's been knocking around for over 2 years. It has opposition, stiff opposition, from the tech industry, who doesn't want to have any oversight of content, any restrictions. It has stiff opposition from the ACLU and a Fed partner that doesn't seem so likely, which is the House of Representatives. They both are worried about censorship and freedom of speech, and you'll hear a lot about this between now and September, because the people with the money and the propaganda on this are the tech industry. It's the second largest lobby in Washington next to the gun lobby. Somebody said, whenever you hear somebody claiming that something is controlling freedom of speech, you want to pay attention to them, because they're protecting something. And what we have right now is a wide open internet. It is totally wide open. And you may say, as many adults say to me, so I'm not on the internet. I don't use Facebook. I don't use Instagram. I don't use TikTok. And I say, well, do you use email? Yeah. Do you ever Google anything? Yeah. Do you ever buy anything on Amazon? Yes. Do you ever look at a video that was produced and made available by YouTube? Yes. Well, that's social media. And everything you're doing is being categorized and collected, and they're putting profiles on us. And that part of it seems oblivious to people who use the internet. It's not like writing a letter to a friend. and it's being enabled by advertising. So why is this? And I think this timing of this talk couldn't be better, because it has to be focused on the health of our children. America's internet policy was created 28 years ago. It was designed to encourage rapid growth and keep America in the lead of the international big tech race. This antiquated policy was crafted in 1996, when U.S. internet penetration was less than 15%, and globally, internet penetration was 0.09%. Russia didn't have it, Iran didn't have it, China didn't have it, North Korea didn't have it, India didn't have it. And we're still using that policy today. Importantly, 28 years ago, the internet was envisioned to grow through user subscriptions, like telephone service, rather than advertising. And this made sense to most people in 1996, because you'll recall to hook up your word processor up to get email, you had to use a telephone line and a modem, and it made that sound that kids today don't know what we're talking about. So there was no advertising, and there were no videos. And as Mike Pine at Procter & Gamble said to me when I said, my kids are using the internet, shouldn't we be looking at this for marketing in the future? And he said, no. And I said, why? He said, because the screen's too small. That was well before the smartphone, which didn't come out until 2007. And he was right. There were no videos. There was no color. It was text. What we didn't see was how quickly the advertising that was text oriented, like classified ads in your local newspaper. You remember that on Sunday, that big thick section? It's not there anymore, is it? Well, that paid for the light bulbs in the office and the heat and air conditioning at the newspaper. And that's why newspapers have fallen off so badly, because it took the revenue away from them. It was like their annuity. And that's just one of the things that happened that we didn't really see. It just kind of happened. We developed this Communication Decency Act in 1996, which specifically exempts platforms from liability over user content. So that's called Section 230, and you'll hear about that over the next few months, even more than you have already. It has clearly not kept pace with today's reality. Platforms flourish through advertising. 90 to 95% of their revenue comes from advertising and the sale of your data to other marketers or your children's data. And the revenue on internet platforms is staggering. It just keeps going up and up and up. And so they don't want to have any oversight of this because they're afraid it'll slow the growth down. The FTC defines advertising supported speech as, quote, speech which promotes at least some kind of commerce and is less protected under the First Amendment than other forms of speech. You know, all speech isn't free. We long ago decided in this country that you couldn't walk into an unlit movie theater and yell fire if there was none. So when somebody starts talking about freedom of speech and censorship, look out. This standard that the FTC used evolved to protect consumers from potentially harmful media content from the rise of newspapers and magazines at the end of the 1880s and 90s into the radio era, the entertainment era, and on television. We've had some modifications of standards that go into truth and factual content, and as well as liability. These protections weren't extended to the internet, and it's now a mature medium. 92% of American households have it. 70% of the global village has internet. India is still slow, they're at 46%, but Russia has 92%. China has 78%. And it's a mature medium now. It shouldn't be treated like it's up and coming. And these same protections were not applied to cable TV when cable TV started in 1980, because it was different than the three networks. So those standards for truth and facts and honesty and liability didn't migrate over to the cable TV stations, and they haven't been applied to CNN, MSNBC, Breitbart, Newsmax, Fox News. When you hear people claiming that this censorship is preventing advertisers from advertising on conservative media, it's because they want more money. And it's always been that way. And by the way, I'm neither conservative nor liberal. I'm American. And a lot of times when we talk today, people want to immediately put you in a place because it's easier for them, because it's upsetting to them if they hear something that's different than what they believe. So we have no protections for harmful content, and it's getting worse. What's more important is we have no protection for Chinese, Russian, Iranian, North Korean, anybody else's algorithms trying to reach you and your children and your family. You shouldn't be worried about only TikTok. You should be worried about everything because they have access to everything. We set it up that way because we were arrogant. In 2008, after China came out in the Olympics and had that wonderful introduction to the world, the internet companies said, we're going to go to China and Russia and launch our platforms there. And of course, they talked to people like me and Procter and Gamble and Johnson & Johnson because we had already launched Crest and Head and Shoulders and, Pampers and so forth. And they wanted to know what the best practices were and who you had to talk to in the government and so forth. So we told them that. And they came back and the Chinese said, you're not coming in here. And you know why, if you think about it. Remember Voice of America? Why would they want Voice of America talking directly to their consumers any more than we would? But we stupidly were arrogant enough to say, well, they'll eventually need us. So we went and launched those platforms in like Indonesia. Well, Indonesia is now the third largest Facebook country in the world because its population is bigger than the United States and their mean age is 24. So it didn't hurt the platform's volume or profits not to get in China or Russia. And we just decided that we'd leave ours open. And so they have been using our airwaves to do Voice of Russia, Voice of China, right here in your community. Some people say, well, I don't know, how do they do that? I mean, it's not Chinese. No, they're smarter than that. Just like we wouldn't put Voice of America in only English in Germany in World War II. Today, online platforms accept $11 billion in advertising targeted to kids and to sell their data. With the recent House Judiciary report pushing for even more spending on unfettered content, it's time for our antiquated communications policy to be modified. It's become a gateway for foreign and domestic adversaries to exploit our unregulated digital space, harming our children and our democracy. Now, programming that is inconsistent with their consumer and shareholder responsibilities. Internet platforms and many politicians argue for more advertising spending while claiming the ad-funded user content is entirely protected by the First Amendment. It's not. In organizations like Mothers Against Media Addiction and Fair Play, organizations of mothers and parents who have lost children due to internet harm, bullying, hate speech, illegal drug appeal, they're counting on our government to pass this law and to go back and look at our Communications Act of 1996. So it's ironic that this recent House Judiciary report accuses the advertising industry of censorship for avoiding media platforms untethered to standards of truth, facts, or public safety. And this invites our adversary to rely even more on the internet to spew harmful ideas to our children, tamper with our elections, which we know they're doing, and introduce content that is a national security threat. By arguing for an unbridled internet, the ACLU and House Judiciary ignore our history with ad-funded media content. It ignores that kids are dying while advertisers are buying, and that America is being played by foreign and domestic adversaries. Thank you very much.
I live there, and that you provide something like you in your book. Just a few words about special events that the Friends of the Chicago Writers Center sponsors. We're getting to the point of the summer when many of these special events are in the past. At the beginning of the season, we had the reception with friends on the porch, where light refreshment and lively conversations were served. We also had a writing contest that closed at the end of July, but this coming Sunday on the 11th at 2:30 in the Hall of Philosophy, awards will be presented. Just last night, we had the Favorite Poem Project established by Robert Pinsky, at which about a dozen, maybe a little more than a dozen, Chicagoans shared their favorite poems. 13 according to my wife. A lucky 13 Chicagoans shared their favorite poems. Look for all these events next year if you missed out on them this year. And another reminder, we'll have a free Q&A at the end of the reading, and books will be for sale. But now our next author and reader. In the bullpen there, Dr. Paul Simonelli. He retired in 2014 after 16 years on the Performing Arts faculty at the Landon School in Bethesda, Maryland. What a coincidence, I taught there too. Where he taught general music, music theory, music history, chamber ensemble, vola, middle ensemble, string ensemble, as well as assisting with the jazz band. He was the director of strings as well as the assistant conductor of the Landon Symphony. Dr. Simonelli holds a doctoral degree in music education from the Catholic University of America, where he was the director of their jazz band and the Fighting Cardinals Pep Band. While a Catholic, he was appointed to the part-time music faculty as an instructor of string bass, a position he held until his retirement from that in 2023. From 1959 to 1973, Dr. Simonelli was a member of the United States Marine Band, the President's Home. His primary duty was to perform at the White House and the State Department, as well as many other diplomatic functions. While there, he accompanied such luminaries as Peggy Lee, Vicky Carr, Sammy Davis Jr., the Fifth Dimension, Johnny Mathis, Red Skelton, Gary Puckett, Jerome Hines, Bob Hope, and others for private presidential audiences. He began playing string bass at age 11 and has been an active professional performer for over 60 years throughout the greater Washington, Baltimore area. In the classical field, he has performed with orchestras in Alexandria, Fairfax, Richmond, and Lynchburg, Virginia, Tucson, Arizona, the Catholic University of America, the Landon Symphony, the Thomas Jefferson University, the Columbia Orchestra, the Symphony of the Potomac, and the Baltimore Chamber Orchestra. Most importantly, though, he was music director for Kiss Cake, which got hyperactive. I knew you looked familiar. Paul was a published writer with McFarland's books. He has written biographies of former Washington Senators Slugger, Roy Stevens, and Joe Cambria, the Super Scout of the Washington Senators. Those books are available on Amazon. And after this meeting, Dr. Paul Simonelli.
Very much. Thanks for coming out. Stay dry. So Al and Murray are walking home from the restaurant after the early bird special in South Florida. They're watching behind them and they're talking about it. Al says, Murray, that was a great meal. My lamb was great. The rice was delicious. The food was great. The bread, waiters was looking at it, was really great. Murray says, Al, that's nothing. The restaurant we went to last was unbelievable. 2 stars, like Michelin, with like Johnson & Johnson prices. It was unbelievable. The wine was so great that we ordered a glass of wine. I never ordered a glass of wine. It was fantastic. It was unbelievable. Well, Al said, well, where is it, Murray? Murray goes, this happens all the time. See, I can't know my name now. I know what it is. Wait, I got it. It's red flower. It's red, long, prickly stem. Al says rose. He says, that's it. Rose, where's that restaurant we went to last week? Because we're all there, right? We, the frontal lobe doesn't work, and we're not remembering like we used to. So I'm going to ask you, my friend, to just close your eyes, if you would, with me, and take a trip back when you're 10 years old. You're 10 years old, and you're going to your first baseball game. 9, 10, 11, 12, mom and dad taking you to the game. Remember who your hero was. Who's the person that you worship? Because baseball is never better than when you're 10 years old. Right? And baseball is usually the first time where you have the opportunity to attach to something other than your family that you love. And you have a hero. Does everybody have a hero? Yeah? Okay? Keep that thought in mind, because we're going to come to Mickey in just a second. Mickey Mantle, if you're from further south, it's Stan Musial from St. Louis. You know, Mickey Mantle was praised. Bob Feller was pitching the whole 9 yards. For me, growing up in Washington, D.C., it was Roy Sievers. Roy Sievers, a very undervalued, underrated player who was a monstrous home run hitter in a cavernous stadium in Washington, D.C. And he still was able to set home run records, franchise records for the Senators, 54, 55, 56, 57, in a stadium that's big enough to be Yellowstone Park. Okay? And that's where he hit his home run. Ted Williams said he had one of the sweetest right hands in baseball. So I decided after I finished at Landon School, I wanted to write his biography. I called him up and I said, Roy, I'd like to write your biography. He said, sure. Come on down, we'll talk about it. And that's the way he was. The sweetest, gentlest, kindest soul that you ever want to see, and one of the most feared hitters in baseball. In 1949, the first all-time Rookie of the Year in 1949, he unfortunately had the bad luck of being stuck on last place teams in the National League 5 years with the St. Louis Browns, who competed with the Washington Senators for last place from 1954 to 1959. He was just saddled on losing teams all the time. And in the 50s, if you're Mickey Mantle and you're with a winner, right? You're MVP, you're Triple Crown winner, you're got all the rings in the world and the whole line, anybody knows your name. Roy Sievers was just as good as Mickey Mantle was. Matter of fact, in 1957, he out-hit Ted Williams and Mickey Mantle with a home run crown and RBI crown as well. Mickey Mantle says he really respected Roy Sievers as a hitter. And Shirley Povich with the Washington Post said, there's really no reason to go see the Washington Senators play except for Roy Sievers. So Roy Sievers was my childhood hero, and I wanted to write a paean to him to show the love that I had for baseball and for him. And my first book about the world was A Labor of Love. That's really what it was. So sad when he passed on opening day in 2017, of all things, great way for a ball player to pass away on opening day, the perfect day. But he's the only 4 people in Major League Baseball have pinch hit grand slam home runs in both leagues, National League and American League. Only one of 4 people in the world. So he still has the distinction of being that big home run hitter, a wonderful guy, saved so many games for the Washington Senators. But unfortunately, you know, there'd be nobody on base. So the majority of his home runs were solo shots. So they didn't help the team. Solo shots don't help the team. You got to have people on base to score runs. But that's all it is. So remember who your hero was and what they did in baseball. And Roy Sievers brought life to the Washington Senators all throughout the 1950s. By 1959, the Senators had gotten bigger. Armin Killebrew came into his own. Bob Allison came into his own. And so they decided they traded him away to the White Sox, Chicago White Sox. He was 2 years with the White Sox in 61 and 62, and then he went to the Philadelphia Phillies. He helped them as far as to move up the ladder, and then he was traded back to the Washington Senators, where he finished his career in 1967. So he had a marvelous career. He was well loved, and he probably would have been more honored in the Hall of Fame or considered for the Hall of Fame had he not had a very serious injury in 1951 when he was sent down to the minor leagues. He went to go for a ball, and he completely tore his shoulder out of the socket. Yeah, that bad. And he tried for years to get it back together. In 1952, he had to have a special operation at Johns Hopkins University to actually put his shoulder back in the socket and knitted the tendons around in order to hold it together so it wouldn't fall off again. I'm not kidding. That's how bad it was. I mean, nowadays, of course, you know, Tommy John surgery, you're out after a year and you're back on, you know, 100-mile-an-hour curveball. Back then, no, it took almost 40 years for him to get his shoulder back together. And by then, he was traded to the Senators, and by then the arm was healed, and then he started hitting home runs again. So, if you're interested in hero worship, I ask you to read about Roy Sievert. Everything that's in there about him just screams loyalty to a team. And that's what he was. Whatever team he was very, very loyal and a very, very productive hitter. When he retired in 1967, he was only one of 8 people to have hit more than 300 home runs. And he still, to this day, has 318 home runs, and he's still not considered for the Hall of Fame. So it's unfortunate. Now, the reason why he did hit a lot of home runs was because, unfortunately, it was this guy. Now, who's this guy? This was my academic exercise. When my editor said to me, "Why don't you write a book on this guy?" I said, "I don't know this guy." And I said, "Okay." Well, I found out about this guy. This did more for baseball than you could possibly ever imagine, and nobody knows who about it. If I say Tom Greenway, does that mean anything to you? No? If I say Mickey Mantle, does that mean something to you? Right? If it weren't for Tom Greenway, there'd be no Mickey Mantle, because Tom Greenway found him. If I said Cy Slapnicka, does that mean anything to you? No. You know who Bob Feller is? There was no Cy Slapnicka, there'd be no Bob Feller. Who found him? Toiling in a sandlot league in Kansas, and found him and got him with the Cleveland Indians. And the rest is history. Rapid Robert was a fantastic pitcher. Mickey Mantle, of course, was everybody's idol growing up in 51 until he retired in 68. But it was the scouts who found the talent. And Joe Cambria became a one-man scouting crew for the Washington Senators. And really, his distinction comes from the fact that he was the first man to actually find players in Cuba. And he actually, it is actually, reality and actually, but he actually predated Jackie Robinson by bringing tan-skinned players into the league as early as 1935 for the Washington Senators. So he sort of pre-integrated baseball before Jackie came around in 1947. He paved the way for the races to blend. Now, because the players were tan more than they were black, Clark Griffith did not want to have a black player on the team. There's no racial bias on it. He just was such an arch conservative, he didn't want to break the color barrier, the unwritten rule that baseball had that there'd be no blacks playing in the white American League. They had everything else. They had Chinese, they had Lithuanians, they had Polish, they had Italian, they had, Jewish players. Hank Greenberg, of course, the greatest Jewish, player of all time. But there's never any black player. The Cubans were an exception, however, because they were just tan enough not to be black and not black enough to be excluded. And Joe Cambria took advantage of that by hiring those who could pass in 40s and 50s baseball as being white. And so the press actually, and for Clark Griffith and Cambria, helped to whiten these players by saying they were not black, they were Castilian. Okay? They were of pure Spanish blood. And as long as that was there, then they were fine with the media, they were allowed to play. But unfortunately, they were not American, they spoke a funny language, you were in post-war America, you spoke American. If you didn't, unfortunately, you became the N-word, and they became that way as well, unfortunately. So the Cuban players suffered the same kind of degradation that Jackie Robinson did starting in 1947 and on through, until acceptance happened more along on in the 60s. But Joe Cambria really is an incredibly interesting Alger Hiss, pull yourself up from the bootstraps kind of story. Italian immigrant, came over at the turn of the century. He played baseball for a little while. He played minor league baseball up in Canada, broke his leg, couldn't play anymore, decided to go into the laundry business, of all things. The laundry business. And it was used against him later on. He was always called Joe Cambria, the laundryman from Baltimore, the laundry guy. Even in Cuba, they call him the laundriero, you know, the laundryman. They didn't think he had any business being in baseball because he ran a laundry business. Well, the laundry business was so great in Baltimore that that's where he made his money. And he became a minor league entrepreneur as early as 1928. By the time he retired from owning baseball teams in 1940, he was forbidden in 1940, longer story, read the book, you'll find out. He had baseball teams in every classification from single A up to triple A. Every classification, C League, B League, B League, every classification. He was crazy nuts about baseball, and was also crazy nuts in helping kids play baseball. That was a big thing for him. He started early leagues for kids in their teens. He started makeup leagues for rookies that came into the league to help them grow into American League Baseball and to shepherd them into American League Baseball. Of course, so he could make a few bucks. He wasn't dumb, and he was a scout, and he would get these guys, he would coach them up, they'd have great big years, and he'd throw them off to the Washington Redskins. Became very, very close with Clark Griffith, and became the scout for the Washington Redskins. Now, it wasn't only Cuban players. Before 1935, he found Mickey Vernon, he found Walt Masterson, he found not Joe Collins, no, I'm sorry. See what's happening? Even happens to me, and I wrote the damn book. So he found a lot of fine white ball players that went on to great careers. But it wasn't until 1935 that they decided that he would go to Cuba, and he found a lot of these players. Unfortunately, they were great players with great glove and no bat. So they were lucky to get on. If they got on, okay, it was great. They liked to steal bases. They would go crazy stealing bases. They would run pitchers ragged. And that was their kind of baseball in Cuba. Was like a bunt hit or a single, get on to first base, steal second, steal third, steal home if you can. That's the way the Cubans played. They played a lot of inside, they call that inside baseball. There was no long ball hitters because the Cubans were very diminutive. They were 5'6", 5'7" most of the time, but they were really great with the glove. They were great defensively, but they never got on base. Unfortunately, Cambria brought these Cubans to the Washington Senators by the truckloads, and I mean 20 to 25, Cubans every year that he had in Florida. And they would come up, they would be adequate players, but adequate at best. And Roy Seaver still, they would get on base. Okay? And there were a lot of Cubans on the Washington team. Some of them became very, very good. Jose Valdivieso, Camilo Pascual, and Pedro Ramos became our 1-2 pitchers throughout the entire 1950s. They all came from Cuba. They were great pitchers. Once again, they had nobody behind them. Nobody at second base, nobody in right field, nobody in shortstop, nobody. And so errors constantly committed. Nothing. They lost more games than they could win. They languished in the bottom of the league. And unfortunately, Cambria had a hand in that because he never found the Mickey Mantle. He never found the Bob Feller. I can't, and I take that back. Sorry, didn't say that. Camilo Pascual became the Bob Feller of the Washington Senators. He was a fantastic strikeout pitcher, still holds strikeout record. Camilo Pascual has been inducted into several Hall of Fames in the Caribbean, but also for the Minnesota Twins, where he played for 7 years. And he's the subject of my next book, which I'll talk to you about in a while. But I'll leave you with one short story so we can get to Q&A. It wasn't always about the player. It was always about doing best for the team. From 1949 to 1954, he had a team in Miami, and he was very, very prescient and forward thinking. He had an international team. They were the Havana Cubans. They were based in Florida, but they played in Havana all the time. And then they flew back and forth between Cuba, and they played in the Florida International League. And so they played both in Cuba, and they were there flying back and forth. And there really was an international team, mostly Cubans per se, and a few white players. One of those white players was a guy by the name of Bitsy Mott. Absolutely no idea who Bitsy Mott is. Nobody does. You have no idea. You have no reason to. Only had one good year in the major leagues playing second base for the Philadelphia Athletics. He did very, very well. He was sent back down to the Florida leagues, and Joe Cambria found him in the Florida leagues. Okay, good player, solid player. He bought Bitsy Mott and he put him on the Havana Cubans, and he sent them over to Havana. Whoa! All of a sudden, the Cuban press is saying, why do we need white players on Havana, Cuba? Don't we have enough Cuban players? What do we have to have white players on here for? So he's reverse discriminated again in Cuba. And Joe Cambria said right away, sorry, buddy, you just hurt your leg, okay? You just hurt your leg. Oh, Bitsy's not playing anymore. He went back to the league, and he was traded to another team. So unfortunately, it was one of Cambria's finds that didn't work out. However, after he stopped playing baseball, he became head of security for Elvis. And he was with Elvis all the time, and one of the few people who was his pallbearer at his funeral. And he was in charge of security and local scheduling around the Florida and the southern area for Elvis. So he did a lot of his scheduling and his booking, and he handled security, and right there, right next to him, that was Bitsy Mott. So not famous in baseball, but famous for all of us. So Joe Cambria is a delightful character to understand about. Roy Sievers, of course, was the hitter. This was the entrepreneur. This was the guy who made the baseball what it was. And there were other players that he found that went on to great careers. Willie Miranda, in particular, a great shortstop for the Baltimore Orioles, who had a great career. And of course, Tony Oliva, for those of you guys who know Minnesota Twins baseball, he was the last one to get out. Tony, he was the last Cuban. He got out of Cuba before Castro shut down the island in 1961. And Tony had to use his brother's passport to get out of Cuba. He didn't have one. He had to get out so fast. He used his brother's passport. Came to the Minnesota Twins, became a big monster hit in 1962-63 for two-time first Cuban, first Hispanic to win the batting title back-to-back, 2 years in a row. The fantastic player, and he was just inducted into the Hall of Fame. So Joe Cambria did have his Mickey Mantle, and he found that in Tony Oliva, who came to the Hall of Fame. And so good old Joe Cambria is sort of justified in that way. So I hope you enjoyed the talk that I gave. And if you have any questions for either of us, now's the time for Q&A. But thank you very much, Fred. Thank you. Appreciate very much having me here. And I just want to say, I want to congratulate Fred. He's working through a very, very severe hiking addiction. Not many people know about this, but he's taking it one step at a time, but he's not out of the woods yet. All right,
Rim shot. As Paul said, are there any questions for either of the authors? Yes, right here.
I have two questions, but I do have to say something that I found out recently. I had a signed Mickey Mantle card, and I gave it to my mother, and she put it in a, garage sale, sold it for a few dollars, and they're now worth over $500,000.
Well,
That's why I don't have an apartment here.
not $500,000, but worth a decent amount of money if it's an honest Mickey Mantle. You know.
We're talking about a signed Mickey Mantle card that got sold for $2 at a garage sale.
Oh, no, a few pennies.
Oh, the worst.
But could have secured the future for this.
But you didn't help me. I have a question for you and a question for you. My question for you is, what can we do? You know, is there anything we as just ordinary citizens can do to alleviate the problem? And it was hard to eat lunch listening to all that.
So the question for Tim was is, what do ordinary citizens do about this state of the internet?
There's some steps in my book.
Use the microphone.
Okay.
There's some steps in my book, but I think the first thing that most people would tell you is to be more critically analytical of the information you receive. It's just, you just don't know where it's coming from. And be more self-aware of your own biases. It said biases aren't a bad thing. They are if you don't realize that they're coloring your thinking.
But is there anything we can do to get
Yes,
Congress?
your politicians, you can vote. You can find out how they stand on this. Like I said, the House Judiciary Committee, the head of that is a guy named Jim Jordan. And, but it also has Democrats on it. And they're all influenced by big tech.
Okay.
So you can find out what their relationships are with big tech.
It was fascinating.
And it's a very powerful thing. And the other thing that we're trying to advocate for is literacy education in the schools. Teach the children better how media affects us and how to use it.
Thank you. And then my question for you was, all those guys that came up from Cuba and they were into baseball, did they make a lot of money? Because today the baseball players make a fortune.
The Cuban players make a lot of money.
No.
Okay.
Nobody.
Joe Cambria was a skinflint. Clark Griffith was a skinflint. Joe Cambria, unfortunately, took advantage of the horrible poverty that was in Cuba. These are kids that were making $22.50 a month, maybe $200 a year, working in sugarcane factories for Hershey Company and things of this nature. You come down to Cuba and you say, I'll give you $1,500 a year, which is like $3,500 less than the minimum, and I'll give you $1,500 a year to play baseball for 6 months out of the year. No Cuban kid's going to say no to that. Of course they stuff it up. So he did take advantage of that. That's a really bad thing that he did, and he knew he was taking advantage of it.
And he knew.
And he knew. I mean, and pretty soon the Cuban kids, they said, no, I don't think so. And league minimum is $5,000. I'll play for the league minimum. So they
And
finally.
is that compared to the Americans, what they were getting paid?
Oh no, I mean they were getting more. But back in the 1950s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, you had the reserve clause. I don't know if you heard about that in baseball. That was the one that was finally overturned in the 1970s. The reserve clause was that you were the property of the team, and you yourself had to negotiate your salary with the owner of the team. You either played for what he gave you, or you tried to fight for more. Simple as that.
Thank you, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm just reminded back in that era, professional athletes didn't make the superstar, and people like in football, Lou Groza, insurance agent. I mean, right? They had to have other jobs back then. A final question from anyone. Let me make just a few announcements about the literary arts. Few reminders. Thursday at 3:30, the two authors of the week, Amy Mateo, World of Wonders, and Matt de la Pena, Mexican White Boy. On Friday, on the boards, community reading, 2 or 3 readers from the poetry workshop and 2 or 3 from the prose workshop will be reading. Our sister art theater this coming weekend, a world premiere of Kate Hamill's The Light and the Dark. You catch it if you're around. Next week on the Authors Hour, Christine Cassetti, fiction work, her novel Magda's Standing, and Susan Nussbaum, her latest book of poetry, her third, I believe, This Uncertain Voyage. A reminder that a video of this presentation will be put on the YouTube channel. That's the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center channel, if you search for it. And anything from 2020 on, when we all went digital, right? Zoom and all that. You can see past readings there. Thank you for coming today, despite the weather. Hope to see you next week. Take care.
My grandson is going to Ithaca College to be a sportscaster. He's a